Hi guys, here we are with our next lesson. We're going to take a look at Roman culture, and that is found in section 5.3 and 5.4. Note that section 4 talks about Christianity. We're not going to talk about Christianity. I'm going to save that for another unit. Instead, we're going to focus on Roman art, architecture, literature, family life, daily life, as well as traditional Roman religion. So, let's begin. Our big idea is that the Romans spread both Greek and Roman contributions to art, architecture, literature, and religion throughout the empire. Let's recall how big the empire really was, and the fact that this big idea is simply stating that examples of Roman culture can be found all the way up in Britain and all the way down in Asia, over in Mesopotamia, and over in Spain. So you might find roads, bridges, aqueducts, colosseums, amphitheaters. In some cases, maybe there's texts yet to be discovered in some of these places. But the Roman Empire was large, and wherever the military conquered, Roman culture was there to go. So, first we have to talk about influences on Rome. Recall, I showed you this slide before. The earliest Romans were influenced by the Etruscans and from the Greeks. I want to focus on the influences from the Greeks because that's what we're going to be talking about today: sculpture, architecture, and literature, as well as religion. Now, it's not that the Greeks necessarily carbon copied what the Greeks had done. The Romans looked to the Greeks for inspiration. Let's step back at this map and take a look. Remember that after the Punic Wars, the Greeks continued to conquer all of the Mediterranean, and so they would have conquered all of the land over here. And at that time, that land was controlled by Alexander the Great, and the language that was spoken was Greek. And so as the Romans conquered these places, they would absorb and adopted many of the cultural features of those places. Also keep in mind that Greek colonists settled Sicily and the Italian coast, and many of those earliest influences were from the Greeks. And so they would have also absorbed influences from the earliest peoples as well. And so again, when we look at these influences from the Greeks, I don't want us to think that they are simply imitating what the Greeks had already done. The Romans looked to them for inspiration and then continued to build and adapt and to make their own contributions to these various cultural areas. And it's those differences that I want to take a look at. Before we talk about those differences, we have to ask ourselves, what inspires art and architecture? If we make a painting or a sculpture today, what motivates a person to create it? What do they create it for? What are they trying to show or trying to portray? Before looking at Roman art and architecture, we want to ask ourselves, what do you think the Romans might be trying to portray? And I'm trying to give you a hint here because I'm showing you this picture, and you should recall that this picture shows us the story of Cincinnatus. And there's some virtues that are supposed to be highlighted in the story of Cincinnatus. And those virtues, again, are duty, courage, and discipline. And it also highlights the significance of the military. And again, the military, which is helping to expand the empire. And so it's really these virtues which are going to inspire and inform much of our art and architecture. Other things that inspire our art and architecture are going to be to show the heroic deeds, to glorify war, to praise the generals who led the Roman legions into victory. In many cases later on in the empire, they're going to build monuments as propaganda. They're going to make a political statement by building these monuments, and they want to publicize a viewpoint to ensure their own power, to dramatize their own power. They want to make a political statement. One person that did that would be Augustus Caesar. This is a popular statue of him, and you gaze upon this statue sitting out there in the maybe in the Roman Forum, and you're immediately going to think of duty and courage and honor and faithfulness. The qualities that this man embodies as a perfect example of a model citizen. And so somebody who's trying to be influential, they have success in battle, definitely they'll want to create statues of themselves or have them commissioned. So they tell a story, but they also make a statement. Art, in particular now, we talked about the Greeks focusing on ideal forms, the Romans focused on realistic forms, the unattractive forms. And here's a great example of that contrast. Venus de Milo is upheld as a perfect statue, perfect proportions, beautiful. Then you have this guy. Roman sculpture showing the imperfections. Romans didn't care about imperfections, they wanted to show reality. Here's another example of a Roman sculpture. Right? It's a beautiful sculpture in its own right. Very detailed, it shows skilled craftsmanship. Right? But it's not the most attractive individual. Right? But that's okay. The Romans are focused on the reality of something. Another example of Roman art would be this painting on a wall in Pompeii. Pompeii was buried by Mount Vesuvius when it erupted in AD 79. It shows scenes from daily life, not necessarily beautiful, just the reality that they lived. Architecture, the Greeks focused on colonnades and rectangular shapes. The Romans, they're going to introduce to the world curves, arches, vaults, domes. It's going to bring up a plethora of new monuments, of buildings that can be constructed, in particular bridges and aqueducts, and this arch that was built to commemorate the victory of the Romans over the Jews in the 1st century AD. It's called the Arch of Titus, and guess where it's located? At the entrance to the Roman Forum. You have to walk through this arch in order to enter into the Roman Forum. And so everybody, when they go through there, they're going to be reminded of this great battle and heroic victory that the Romans underwent. Again, the Greeks focused on rectangular forms, very straight, whereas the Romans gave us the arches. This is the Pont du Gard. It's an aqueduct. Water flowed on the top, and this bottom section was used as a bridge, as a road. And it crossed the river Gard in southern France, and it supplied water to a city. I believe that city was called Nimes. Today this is a popular tourist destination. Here's another picture of an aqueduct. This one is in Spain. Literature during the early empire is known as was the Golden Age, the Age of Augustus. It is when we're introduced to Virgil. He's the author of Aeneid, and it tells the story of Aeneas, who, according to Virgil, is the founder of Rome. And so here we have Romans have their story of their founding of their great city and empire, and it highlights the importance of statecraft. In your textbook, it mentions that Romans believed that their gift to the world was government, was ruling. And think about how that may be true. If we look at our government today in the U.S., it's a combination of Greek and Roman forms of government. And so if Romans believe that their gift to the world is government, well, in a way, 2,000 years later, there's some truth to that statement. Back to the Aeneid, it upholds these virtues of duty, piety, and faithfulness as embodied in the character Aeneas on his journey from Troy to the founding of Rome. Other literature would come from Horace. He wrote satires. And Livy, he was an historian. His stories were meant to more about teaching a moral lesson than about accuracy. And the story of Cincinnatus is brought to us by Livy. And so again, think about the morals, the virtues that story is meant to demonstrate, rather than the historical accuracy behind it. Family life, at the head of every family was the pater familias. The pater familias is the eldest male. He would have been in charge of all the women, children, and slaves. Children would have received an education, both men and women. Oftentimes they were tutored by Greek slaves. This would have been among the wealthier children. Why Greek? Remember I talked about the importance of Greek, especially in the Eastern Mediterranean, the eastern half of the empire. So having a Greek tutor, having your children learn Greek would give them greater opportunities at success in the empire as they grew older. A couple other facts there about boys and girls. Marriages would have been arranged, probably for economic or political reasons, and Here's a scene showing education of two children by a teacher. Women, their roles in the upper class in particular, they were always viewed as inferior in nature, but they did have some rights. They could own, inherit, sell property. They could attend the circus, the gladiatorial combats at the Colosseum. They could go to the dramas and plays at the amphitheater. And they could not participate directly in politics, but they did hold a lot of influence in the home by influencing their husbands. So women did not have public power, but they did have private power. Slavery was significant to the Roman Empire. Up to 1/3 of the population in Rome was a slave, and they would have been responsible for many of the buildings, the roads, the amphitheaters, colosseums, aqueducts that were built throughout the empire. Many of these slaves were conquered peoples. They would have also been used in the mines. They would have been used in as slaves. Of course, as slaves. Slaves would have been used in education, as well as artistic skills, craftsmen. Slave revolts did happen. The most famous one is Spartacus. You have to watch the movie Spartacus. Here's a relief showing two slaves in their shackles and chains being led by a slave master. For everybody else who is living in Rome, life wasn't so good either. There are big social divisions between the rich and the poor. People lived in what were called insulae, apartment buildings. Singular is insula. Insula is a Latin word meaning island. And look how this is an island. Maybe have shops down on the bottom, and then your living spaces, living quarters up in the second and third stories. Think how crowded it would be here. There's over 1 million people in Rome coming from all over the world, a variety of occupations. You would have all sorts of animals, all sorts of noises, all sorts of smells. Probably not a great place to live, especially when you have high rent. There's no plumbing or heating. You have dirty water. You throw it out the window onto the street below. Think about all those smells. It would be miserable. And people were not very happy, as a matter of fact, and you can kind of see why. So, what did they do about it? Well, they had entertainment. They tried to appease the masses. They tried to make people happy with bread and circuses. This is the Circus Maximus, and this is where they had chariot races. You could fit anywhere from 250 to 300,000 people inside of here, and this is what it probably looked like 2,000 years ago, and this is what the area looks like today. You can go and visit it. Guys, if you are single, you looking to mingle, you would go to the Circus Maximus. You know why? Because at the Circus Maximus, they didn't segregate the males and the females. You could meet the ladies by going to the circus. But if you went to the Colosseum, they had strict sections for males and for females, so it would have been harder to meet the ladies there. So, single guys, you went to the Circus Maximus. Religion, again, another influence from the Greeks. They pretty much adopted all of the Greek gods, but gave them a different name. And there was a renewal of many of the traditional practices during the age of Augustus, and so we're going to see a strong influence of religion on politics, and people are going to believe that the proper practice, the right practice of these rituals will ensure the security of the state. And you have 200 years, nearly 200 years of the Pax Romana. Everything is going well for Rome. It's a time of prosperity and wealth and expansion. So people are going to believe that this is occurring because they are making the gods happy. And in order to ensure the continued success of the empire, they are going to want to continue worshiping the gods. Early on in the empire, there were about 77 feast days. Within a couple hundred years, it went up to over 170. Imagine if in Christianity we celebrated, took the day off, and went to the circus, went to the carnival 176 days out of the year. Keep that in mind, because that's going to be one of the reasons for the decline and the end of the Roman Empire.